Welcome back to my channel, where we uncover the forgotten corners of the past. Today, I'm taking you into a story about the macabre history of the Walker sisters, a tale you might have never heard before, a mystery buried in the dust of time, a truth that will send shivers down your spine. But before we embark on this journey, take a moment to let me know, where are you listening to this story from? That helps me understand how far these secrets have traveled. And if this story truly captivates you, if it makes you ponder, don't hesitate to give me a like and subscribe to the channel to keep me going. Together, we'll explore the darkest pages of history, and you won't want to miss a thing. There are places in this world where silence is not merely the absence of sound, but a living, breathing presence, an entity that presses against the skin, seeps into the bones, and lingers long after footsteps have faded. In the remote hollows of the Appalachian Mountains, silence is both a shield and a warning, a veil drawn over secrets too heavy for daylight. Here, in the shadowed heart of eastern Tennessee, the story of the Walker sisters begins, a story so unsettling, so persistently shrouded in rumor and dread, that even the most seasoned historians hesitate to speak its name aloud. The first hint of unease comes not from the land itself, but from the way people speak of it, or more precisely, the way they do not. In the towns that border the Great Smoky Mountains, the name Wye Hollow is rarely uttered above a whisper. Old men at the general store lower their voices when the subject arises, glancing over their shoulders as if the trees themselves might be listening. Children are warned, in tones that brook no argument, never to stray too far into the woods, especially as dusk gathers and the mist begins to rise. There are stories. Of course, there are always stories, but they are told in fragments, in the hush of winter evenings, and always with the same refrain: some things are best left alone. Yet, for all the caution and superstition, there remains a magnetic pull to the unknown. What is it about a place that can inspire such collective silence? What happened in that narrow, forgotten valley to warrant its erasure from official memory? The answer, as it so often does, lies buried beneath layers of time, trauma, and the stubborn will of those determined to keep the past at bay. Wye Hollow is not marked on modern maps. Its boundaries are defined by the land itself: steep ridges clothed in ancient forest, streams that vanish into the earth, and a persistent fog that clings to the hollows long after the sun has burned away the morning chill. The air here is thick with the scent of moss and decaying leaves. The ground is soft and treacherous underfoot. Even in daylight, the woods seem to absorb sound, muffling the calls of birds and the rustle of small animals. At night, the darkness is absolute, broken only by the occasional flicker of lantern light from a distant cabin window, if, indeed, anyone remains to tend the flame. The isolation of Wye Hollow is not merely geographical, but historical, according to land records preserved in the Cade County archives. The Walker family first settled this valley in the aftermath of the Civil War. John Walker, a veteran returned from battle, built his homestead with his own hands, carving a life from the wilderness for his wife Margaret and a growing brood of children. Over the decades, the Walkers became a fixture of the region, respected for their self-sufficiency, yet regarded with a certain wary distance by their neighbors. They attended church only sporadically, traded little with the outside world, and seemed content to let the world beyond the mountains pass them by. By the early 20th century, as the rest of America lurched through cycles of prosperity and depression, Wye Hollow remained stubbornly unchanged. Electricity and paved roads came late. if at all. The rhythms of life were dictated by the seasons, by the demands of the land, and by the unspoken rules that governed every interaction. Outsiders were tolerated, but never truly welcomed. The mountains, it was said, had a way of keeping their own. Yet beneath this veneer of tradition and tranquility, there simmered a tension, a sense that the peace of Hollow was maintained at a cost. The walkers, for all their independence, were not immune to the hardships that plagued the region. Crop failures, illness, and the slow attrition of time took their toll. The family cemetery behind the homestead grew crowded with simple headstones, each marking a life claimed by the relentless march of years. And as the world outside grew ever more complex, the walkers retreated further into themselves, drawing the boundaries of their domain ever tighter. It is in this context that the legend of the Walker sisters takes root. By the 1960s, the once sprawling family had dwindled to a handful of aging women, Louisa, Hetty, and Martha, who clung to the old ways with a tenacity that bordered on fanaticism. Their cabin, a two-story structure of weathered logs and hand-hewn beams, stood as a testament to a vanished era. The sisters grew their own food, spun their own cloth, and refused all but the most essential contact with the outside world. To the casual observer, theirs was a life of admirable simplicity, a living relic of Appalachian heritage. But to those who looked closer, there were signs that all was not as it seemed. Children dared each other to approach the edge of the Walker property, hoping for a glimpse of the reclusive sisters as they worked in their garden or hung quilts to dry. Locals spoke in hushed tones of strange lights seen in the woods at night, of voices carried on the wind, of a chill that settled over Hollow even in the height of summer. The sisters themselves were objects of both respect and unease, admired for their herbal knowledge and fierce independence, yet regarded with suspicion for their refusal to adapt, their insistence on privacy, and the air of quiet sorrow that seemed to hang about them like a shroud. According to the faded pages of a journal kept by Reverend Phillips, who served the primitive Baptist church in nearby Townsend, the Walker sisters were women of uncommon strength and uncommon burdens. He wrote of their rare appearances at Sunday service, always seated together in the last pew, their faces grave and inscrutable. They keep to themselves, he noted, and the congregation is content to let them do so. There is a heaviness about them, as if they carry more than their share of the world's troubles. The sisters' isolation was not merely a matter of choice, but of necessity. The land that had once sustained a large family now supported only the barest subsistence. The world beyond Hollow had grown strange and threatening, its promises of progress and prosperity ringing hollow in the ears of those who had seen too many dreams wither on the vine. For Louisa, the eldest, the homestead was both sanctuary and prison, a place where the past could be preserved, but also a fortress against the encroaching chaos of the modern age. It was Louisa who maintained the strict routines that governed daily life. Each morning, she rose before dawn to tend the vegetable garden, her movements precise and unhurried. Hetty, her younger sister, cared for the few remaining livestock, her hands deft and silent as she milked the goats or gathered eggs from the chicken coop. Martha, the youngest, kept the cabin itself in immaculate order, scrubbing floors and mending clothes with a diligence that bordered on obsession. Their days were marked by ritual and repetition, each task a bulwark against the uncertainty that pressed in from all sides. Yet even within this carefully ordered world, there were cracks, moments when the mask of normalcy slipped, revealing glimpses of something darker beneath. On the mantel above the fireplace, 6 wooden dolls stood in a silent row, each carved with loving detail and dressed in miniature versions of the sisters' own clothes. Visitors who noticed the dolls often remarked on their uncanny resemblance to the women of the house, but the sisters offered no explanation for their presence. At night, before retiring, Louisa would pause to ensure that each doll remained in its proper place, her fingers lingering on the worn wood as if seeking reassurance from some silent guardian. The arrival of James Blackwood in the summer of 1964 marked the first true disturbance in the sisters' routine in decades. Blackwood, a folklorist from the University of Tennessee, had come to Cade County in search of stories, oral histories, traditional songs, the fading echoes of a way of life he feared was vanishing forever. Tall and thin, with wire-rimmed glasses and a tape recorder slung over his shoulder, he was an outsider in every sense, yet possessed a curiosity that would not be denied. Blackwood's first encounter with the Walker sisters was marked by a tension that hovered just beneath the surface. He arrived at the homestead on a morning heavy with the promise of rain, the air thick with the scent of wet earth and wood smoke. Louisa met him at the door, her posture rigid, her eyes wary. "We don't need anything," she said, her voice flat and final. But Blackwood, undeterred, explained his purpose to record their stories, to preserve their knowledge for future generations. After a long, silent moment, Louisa relented, gesturing for him to enter. Inside, the cabin was a study in contrasts, spotlessly clean, yet sparsely furnished, warm with the glow of the hearth, yet shadowed by an indefinable gloom. Hetty and Martha joined them, their faces betraying little emotion as Blackwood set up his equipment and began his questions. The sisters answered politely, but with a brevity that bordered on evasiveness. When Blackwood inquired about their family history, their eyes grew distant, their voices tinged with a sadness that seemed to echo from some unreachable depth. As the afternoon wore on, Blackwood became increasingly aware of the undercurrents swirling beneath the surface. There was a tension in the room, a sense that every word was weighed and measured before being released. When he asked to see the upstairs rooms, Louisa's expression hardened. "That won't be necessary," she said, her tone brooking no argument. The interview ended soon after, with Blackwood promising to return the following week. It was only as he prepared to leave that Blackwood noticed the row of wooden dolls on the mantel. He paused, drawn by their uncanny presence, and asked if they were family heirlooms. The sisters exchanged a glance quick, almost imperceptible, before Martha replied, her voice tight. "You could say that. They're remembrances." The words hung in the air, heavy with unspoken meaning. That night, as a storm rolled in from the mountains, the sisters gathered around the kitchen table, the flicker of an oil lamp casting long shadows on the log walls. Outside, the wind howled through the trees, carrying with it the distant echo of something that might have been a human cry. Inside, the air was thick with unspoken fears. "He'll be back," Hetty murmured, her hands trembling around her mug of tea. Louisa nodded, her jaw set. "We've kept our promise this long. We'll keep it still." Martha, her gaze fixed on the narrow staircase leading to the upper floor, he whispered, "Perhaps it's time. We're old. Sisters, who will keep watch when we're gone? The question lingered in the darkness, unanswered. In the morning, Martha found deep footprints in the mud circling the cabin, vanishing into the trees. She called her sisters to see, and for a moment, all three stood in silence, the weight of the past pressing down upon them. "It's starting again," Louisa whispered, her voice barely audible above the sighing of the wind. In the days that followed, the atmosphere in Y Hollow grew taut with anticipation. Blackwood's presence had disturbed something long dormant, stirring memories the sisters had labored for decades to suppress. The townsfolk, sensing a shift in the air, grew more guarded, their conversations halting whenever the Walker name was mentioned. Sheriff Delmore, who had made a habit of visiting the homestead each month, found the sisters agitated, their questions sharp and suspicious. They were worked up about that university fellow. He confided to his deputy, his own unease evident in the set of his shoulders. Yet, for all the tension and secrecy, life in Y Hollow continued much as it always had. The sisters rose before dawn, tended their chores, and kept to themselves. But beneath the surface, the old routines had acquired a new edge, a sense of waiting, of watching, of bracing for the inevitable intrusion of the outside world. The wooden dolls remained on the mantel, silent sentinels over a household teetering on the brink of revelation. And so, as the summer deepened and the shadows lengthened across the valley, the stage was set for a confrontation decades in the making. The Walker sisters, guardians of secrets too terrible to name, stood at the threshold of a reckoning they could neither prevent nor escape. In the hush of Y Hollow, the silence grew heavier, pregnant with the promise of truths that would not remain buried forever. The first true fracture in the uneasy calm of Y Hollow came not with a shout, but with a question, one that lingered in the air long after it was spoken, like the echo of a distant thunderclap. James Blackwood, ever the patient observer, returned to the Walker homestead under a sky heavy with the threat of rain. He carried with him not only his tape recorder and notebook, but also a growing sense that the story he sought was far more complex and far more dangerous than he had anticipated. On this visit, the atmosphere inside the cabin was taut, as if the very walls had absorbed the sisters' anxiety. Louisa's greeting was clipped, her eyes sharper than before. Hetty's hands trembled as she poured coffee, the cup rattling against its saucer. Martha, usually the most reserved, seemed distracted. Her gaze flickered toward the staircase whenever Blackwood's questions strayed too close to the family's private history. It was a single, seemingly innocuous request that shifted the balance. "I was hoping to see more of your property today," Blackwood ventured, his tone casual, though his heart pounded in his chest. "Particularly that old spring house I noticed on my way in." The effect was immediate and unmistakable. Hetty's hand flew to her throat, and Louisa's eyes narrowed to slits. "That won't be possible," she replied, her voice cold as the mountain stream. "Our spring is running low this year. We don't allow visitors near it." The conversation faltered, and Blackwood, sensing the invisible wall he had struck, made his excuses and left. Yet the question had been asked, and its reverberations could not be contained. That night, in his rented room above the general store, Blackwood recorded his impressions in a journal that would later become a key artifact in the unraveling of the Walker mystery. "The tension in that cabin is palpable," he wrote, "like a clock wound too tight. The sisters are hiding something significant. The spring house is the key." The following morning, Blackwood visited the county records office, hoping to find answers in the dry language of land deeds and death certificates. At first, the clerk was helpful, producing documents that traced the Walker property back nearly a century. But when Blackwood inquired about the deaths of the other sisters, the atmosphere shifted. The clerk's smile faded, and she excused herself, returning moments later with a man who introduced himself as Judge Harrison. The judge's words were polite, but his meaning was unmistakable. "I must ask you to respect the privacy of our citizens, particularly the Walker family. They have experienced considerable tragedy and prefer not to have their personal affairs scrutinized." Blackwood left the office with more questions than answers. The silence surrounding the Walkers was not merely personal, it was institutional, enforced by those with the power to shape what was remembered and what was forgotten. The sense of conspiracy grew heavier with each passing day, as if the very air in Cade County was thick with secrets. That afternoon, Blackwood sought out the primitive Baptist church, hoping to find burial records that might shed light on the family's history. The pastor, at first welcoming, grew guarded when the Walkers were mentioned. "Some matters are between a family and their God," he said, his voice low. The doors to the past remained firmly closed. But the past, as it so often does, found its own ways to speak. That evening, as dusk settled over Y Hollow, Martha waited until her sisters were asleep before slipping outside. A small wooden doll clutched in her hand. She knelt beside the stream, her voice barely more than a whisper. "I know you can hear me. It can't stay buried forever. That man from the university is asking questions. He won't stop until he knows." The words hung in the mist, unanswered, but not unheard. A twig snapped in the darkness. Martha turned, her heart pounding, to find Louisa standing at the edge of the trees, her nightgown ghostly in the moonlight. "Who are you talking to?" Sister Louisa's voice was gentle, but her eyes were hard. Martha clutched the doll to her chest. "Just remembering. Just saying good night." Louisa stepped closer, her gaze never leaving the doll. "You know what happens if you break our promise. Remember Caroline. Remember what she tried to do." Martha nodded, a single tear tracing down her cheek. "I remember. But I remember everything." Inside the cabin, the air was thick with the weight of unspoken words. The sisters moved through their routines with a mechanical precision, each action a defense against the memories that threatened to surface. Yet the cracks were widening. At the general store, conversations halted when Blackwood entered. The room he rented was suddenly unavailable, forcing him to move to a boarding house in a neighboring town. Even the county clerk, once friendly, now barely acknowledged him. The community's defenses were rising, as if to shield itself from the contagion of curiosity. It was an old woman named Eliza Jenkins, a retired midwife, who finally broke the silence. On a rainy afternoon, she invited Blackwood onto her porch, her voice thin but steady as she recounted her memories of the Walker family. "People think those sisters chose to stay unmarried to keep the family land. That's what everyone says now. But it wasn't like that at all. It was John Walker who decided his daughters wouldn't marry. After his sons didn't come back from France, something changed in him. He kept his daughters close, too close, some said. Jenkins's words hinted at a darkness that predated even the sisters' isolation, a legacy of control and fear passed down from father to daughter. She would say no more about the missing hunter, Thomas Rayburn, but her silence was as telling as any confession. Blackwood left her porch with a name, a time frame, and the chilling sense that the roots of the Walker mystery ran deeper than he had imagined. Driven by a need for answers, Blackwood traveled to the county seat, where he pored over yellowed newspaper archives. There, in the brittle pages of the Mobile Times Observer, he found the first concrete evidence of the tragedy that had haunted Y Hollow for decades. Local man missing in mountains, Thomas Rayburn. 27 failed to return from hunting expedition near Cade County line. The search, the hope, the eventual abandonment, all chronicled in terse, impersonal columns. But it was a brief notice, buried deep in the April edition, that caught Blackwood's eye. Missing hunter case closed. Sheriff Robert Delmore announces the case of Thomas Rayburn, missing since February, has been resolved. No foul play suspected. Family requests privacy during their time of grief. The brevity of the notice, its lack of detail, and its placement deep within the paper struck Blackwood as deliberate. He searched for any mention of the Walker sisters during the same period, but found nothing. Yet, in the store ledgers, he discovered a curious shift beginning in May 1934. The sisters began selling quilts, baskets, and herbal remedies at the general store, an abrupt change for a family long known for its self-sufficiency. As Blackwood pieced together these fragments, a picture began to emerge, one of desperation, secrecy, and a community complicit in its own silence. The pressure mounted, not only on Blackwood, but on the sisters themselves. Each day, the routines grew more brittle, the silences heavier. At night, the sisters gathered around the fireplace, their eyes drawn again and again to the row of wooden dolls on the mantel. The dolls, once tokens of remembrance, now seemed to watch over the household with an accusatory gaze. The tension reached its breaking point on a night when the wind howled through the hollow, rattling the windows and setting the old cabin to creaking. Martha, unable to sleep, crept downstairs and stood before the mantel, her hands trembling as she reached for the doll dressed in blue gingham. She carried it outside, past the family cemetery, to the edge of the stream. There, she knelt and whispered into the darkness, her words lost to the wind. I was against it from the start. You know that. But Louisa said we had no choice. And after what happened to Caroline, a sudden movement in the shadows made her freeze. Louisa's voice, low and sharp, cut through the night. Who are you talking to? Martha. The confrontation was brief, but its impact was lasting. The next morning, the sisters moved through the cabin in silence, the air thick with suspicion and fear. Meanwhile, Blackwood's investigation had not gone unnoticed. Judge Harrison, wary of the outsider's persistence, quietly spread word through the community. The university researcher was asking too many questions. The walls of silence closed in, but Blackwood pressed on, driven by a sense that the truth was within reach. It was Martha who finally broke. On a misty morning, as the fog clung to the trees and the world seemed suspended between night and day, she waited on the porch for Blackwood's arrival. Her sisters were away, and for the first time, she spoke freely. "You want to know about Thomas Rayburn?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "And about my sisters Caroline, Polly, and Nancy, about what really happened to them." Her confession was halting, fragmented, as if the words themselves were dangerous. She spoke of the winter of 1934, when hunger gnawed at the family and hope was in short supply. She described how Thomas Rayburn, injured and alone, had been taken in by the sisters. How Louisa, faced with the prospect of starvation, had made a decision that would haunt them all. "You can't understand unless you felt real hunger," Martha whispered, "the kind that makes you forget you're human." She would not describe what happened next, but her meaning was clear. The horror of that winter had not ended with Rayburn's disappearance. It had seeped into the very fabric of the family, poisoning every relationship, every memory. Caroline, unable to bear the guilt, had threatened to confess. Louisa, determined to protect the family, had silenced her. Polly, driven mad by visions of the lost hunter, had taken her own life. Nancy, consumed by sickness and dread, had wasted away. As Martha spoke, the fog lifted, revealing the homestead in the pale morning light. The cabin, the outbuildings, the garden all appeared so ordinary, so innocent, yet beneath the surface, a darkness festered, waiting for the moment when it would no longer be denied. Blackwood listened in silence, the weight of Martha's words settling over him like a shroud. He understood, at last, the true nature of the curse that haunted Y Hollow. It was not a thing of magic or superstition, but a legacy of choices, each one made in desperation, each one compounding the horror of the last. As the day wore on, the sisters returned, their faces closed and unreadable. Blackwood took his leave, his mind reeling with the enormity of what he had learned. The silence of Y Hollow was no longer a mystery to him. It was a monument to suffering, a testament to the terrible price of survival. In the days that followed, the atmosphere in the hollow grew heavier still. The sisters moved through their routines like ghosts, haunted by memories they could not escape. Blackwood, for his part, found himself drawn back to the homestead, unable to let go of the story that had ensnared him. The stage was set for a reckoning, a confrontation that would bring the secrets of Y Hollow into the harsh light of day, and forever alter the lives of all who dwelled there. The first tangible evidence emerged not as a revelation, but as a slow, relentless accumulation, a pattern that could no longer be dismissed as coincidence or rumor. In the autumn months, the land itself seemed to conspire with the truth, surrendering its secrets in fragments. Heavy rains swept through the hollow, eroding the banks of the old stream and exposing what had long been hidden beneath layers of silt and moss. A park ranger, assigned to survey the damage, stumbled upon a cluster of bones tangled in the roots of a fallen tree. The discovery was at first dismissed as the remains of a deer, but closer inspection revealed the unmistakable shape of a human femur, stained dark by decades underground. Forensic teams arrived, their presence a jarring intrusion into the hush of Y Hollow. They worked in silence, sifting through the mud and leaf litter, uncovering more bones, some small and delicate, others robust and unmistakably adult. Among the remains, they found a rusted hunting knife, its handle carved with the initials T.R. and scraps of fabric that matched the patterns of dresses once worn by women of the region. The evidence was undeniable. The land had given up its dead. News of the discovery spread quickly, though official statements were sparse and carefully worded. Ongoing investigation. The authorities said, no comment at this time. But the people of Cade County needed no confirmation. Whispers traveled faster than any official report, and soon the entire community buzzed with speculation. The Walker homestead, long a source of unease, was now the epicenter of a scandal that threatened to shatter the fragile peace. Inside the cabin, the sisters' world contracted. The dolls on the mantel seemed to watch with new intensity, their painted eyes reflecting the flicker of candlelight as the nights grew longer. Martha, her nerves frayed to the breaking point, began to speak in riddles, her words tumbling out in fits and starts. "They're all here," she muttered, tracing the grain of the wooden floor with trembling fingers. "All of them, waiting. We tried to keep them safe. We tried." Investigators catalogued every artifact with a clinical detachment. They photographed the dolls, measured the depth of the graves, and collected strands of hair and buttons from the earth. Forensic reports confirmed the presence of at least 4 individuals, 1 male. 3 female buried together in a shallow grave behind the spring house. DNA analysis, still in its infancy, could not provide names, but the circumstantial evidence was overwhelming. The initials on the knife, the style of the clothing, the proximity to the Walker property all pointed to a single, inescapable conclusion. The weight of proof pressed down on the sisters and on the community that had shielded them for so long. The silence that had once protected Y Hollow now became a suffocating shroud, impossible to maintain in the face of such damning evidence. The past, long denied, had clawed its way to the surface. As the investigation deepened, the psychological toll became impossible to ignore. Martha's mind unraveled, her speech dissolving into a litany of confessions and denials. She spoke of promises made and broken, of nights spent listening to voices that whispered from the walls. "We swore an oath," she cried, her voice raw with anguish. "We did what we had to do. Louisa said it was the only way." Louisa, for her part, maintained a stony silence. She sat by the hearth, her hands folded in her lap, her gaze fixed on the fire. When questioned by the authorities, she answered in monosyllables, her face betraying nothing. Yet beneath her composure, a storm raged, a battle between loyalty and guilt, between the need to protect her family and the knowledge that the truth could no longer be contained. It was Hetty who finally broke the impasse. In a moment of clarity, she summoned the local pastor to the cabin, her voice trembling as she recounted the events of that terrible winter. Her confession was halting, punctuated by sobs and long silences. She spoke of hunger so fierce it drove them to madness, of a stranger taken in and never allowed to leave, of sisters lost to grief and fear. "We buried them," she whispered, "because we could not bear to remember. But the land remembers. The land always remembers." The pastor, shaken to his core, relayed Hetty's words to the authorities. The confession, combined with the physical evidence, left no room for doubt. The full scale of the tragedy was laid bare, a tapestry of desperation, betrayal, and the slow corrosion of the soul. The Walker sisters had not been monsters, but victims of circumstance, driven to unthinkable acts by forces beyond their control. Yet the horror of their choices could not be denied. The community, once complicit in its silence, now recoiled in horror. The Walker name, once spoken with a mixture of respect and fear, became a byword for shame. Neighbors who had once turned a blind eye now whispered accusations, eager to distance themselves from the scandal. The authorities, under pressure to restore order, moved swiftly. The homestead was sealed off, its contents catalogued and removed. The dolls, so long a symbol of remembrance, were boxed and sent to a distant archive, their secrets locked away from prying eyes. Legal proceedings followed, though the passage of time had rendered justice a hollow formality. Louisa, the last surviving sister, was deemed unfit to stand trial, her mind fractured by years of isolation and guilt. The case was closed with little fanfare, the official record sanitized for public consumption. No further action required. The final report read, "Case resolved." Yet the consequences rippled outward, touching every corner of Cade County. The church, once a place of refuge, became a site of whispered prayers and uneasy glances. The general store, where the sisters had once traded their wares, saw its business dwindle as customers avoided the taint of association. Families who had lived in the hollow for generations packed their belongings and left, seeking a fresh start far from the shadow of the past. The land itself seemed to mourn. The garden, once neat and orderly, grew wild and tangled. The orchard withered, its fruit left to rot on the ground. The cabin, stripped of its contents, stood empty and forlorn, its windows staring blankly into the woods. Nature reclaimed what had been taken, erasing the last traces of human habitation. In the end, the truth brought no comfort. The revelation of the Walker sisters' secret did not heal the wounds of the community, but deepened them. The contrast between the outward appearance of respectability and the hidden rot beneath was too stark, too painful to reconcile. The people of Cade County learned to live with the knowledge that evil can flourish in silence, that the line between victim and perpetrator is often blurred by desperation and fear. The story of Wye Hollow became a cautionary tale, a whispered warning passed down through the generations. Some spoke of curses, others of justice denied, but all agreed on one point: the land remembers. And in the hush of the Appalachian night, when the wind stirs the trees and the shadows gather, the past is never truly at rest. The legacy of Wye Hollow did not fade with the passing of its last inhabitants. Instead, it lingered, a persistent shadow that stretched across generations, refusing to be banished by time or reason. The land itself seemed to hold its breath, as if waiting for the next chapter to unfold. In the years that followed the collapse of the Walker homestead, the hollow became a place of uneasy fascination, a magnet for the curious, the lost, and the haunted. Researchers and amateur historians, drawn by the promise of answers, combed through the remnants of the past. They pored over brittle court records, faded photographs, and the cryptic entries in old journals. Some found themselves obsessed, unable to let go of the puzzle, their dreams invaded by images of wooden dolls and silent women standing in the mist. A few, it was whispered, left the region altogether, their nerves frayed by the sense that something in Y Hollow had followed them home. The dolls, once boxed and archived, became the subject of rumor and speculation. Some claimed they had been destroyed in a fire at the county museum, while others insisted they were hidden away in a private collection. Their presence a silent threat to anyone who dared to disturb the past. Occasionally, a hiker would stumble upon a small and hand-carved figure nestled among the roots of an ancient tree, its features worn smooth by rain and wind. These discoveries were rarely spoken of openly, but they fueled the sense that the story was not yet finished. The fate of the last Walker sister remained a mystery. Official records offered only the barest details: a date of death, a burial in an unmarked grave, a note about declining health. But stories persisted. Some said she wandered the woods until her final days, her mind lost to memory and regret. Others believed she had been taken in by distant relatives, her identity concealed to protect her from the curious and the cruel. There were even those who claimed to have seen her ghost, drifting through the hollow at dusk, her eyes searching for something she could never find. The community, too, bore the scars of what had happened. Families who had once prided themselves on their roots in the region now spoke of moving away, seeking a fresh start far from the shadow of Y Hollow. The church, once a place of comfort, became a site of whispered prayers and uneasy glances. The general store, where laughter and gossip had once filled the air, now echoed with the hollow sound of footsteps on bare floorboards. The fabric of daily life, so carefully woven over decades, unraveled thread by thread. Yet, even as the old order crumbled, something new began to take shape. The land, left to its own devices, reclaimed what had been borrowed. Wildflowers crept into the cracks of the foundation. Saplings took root in the shadow of the abandoned cabin. The cemetery, its stones weathered and half-sunken, became a silent testament to the passage of time. Nature, indifferent to human suffering, pressed forward, erasing the scars of history with each passing season. But not all traces could be so easily swept away. The legacy of Y Hollow lingered in the minds of those who remained, a persistent ache that refused to fade. The dolls, once boxed and archived, became objects of fascination and dread. Researchers, drawn by the promise of answers, pored over official records and personal journals, searching for meaning in the fragments left behind. Some claimed to have seen strange figures moving among the trees at dusk, or to have heard voices whispering in the wind. Others spoke of dreams haunted by the faces of women long dead, their eyes filled with accusation and sorrow. The fate of the last surviving sister became a subject of speculation and rumor. Some said she wandered the woods until her final days, speaking to shadows and clutching a faded scrap of blue gingham. Others insisted she had been taken to a distant institution, her mind lost to grief and memory. Official records, when consulted, offered only the barest details: a date, a cause of death, a burial in an unmarked grave. The truth, as always, remained elusive. Yet the story did not end with the passing of its principal actors. The land itself seemed to resist closure, offering up new mysteries as old ones faded. In the years that followed, hikers reported stumbling upon small wooden figures nestled among the roots of ancient trees, their features worn smooth by time and weather. Park rangers, tasked with maintaining the trails, spoke in hushed tones of cold spots and inexplicable chills, of tools gone missing and paths that seemed to shift overnight. The boundaries between past and present, between the living and the dead, grew thin in the hush of Wye Hollow. Historians, piecing together the scattered evidence, found themselves drawn into the same web of uncertainty that had ensnared the community for generations. Official records stated the case was closed, the mystery resolved. Yet the questions persisted. Why had so many chosen silence over truth? What bargains had been struck in the shadows? And at what cost? The answers, if they existed, lay buried beneath layers of fear and shame, waiting for someone brave or foolish enough to dig them up. The legacy of Wye Hollow was not merely one of tragedy, but of warning. The story became a touchstone for those who studied the darker corners of human nature, a case cited in lectures and articles as an example of how isolation and secrecy can breed horrors unimaginable in the light of day. The dolls, the graves, the ruined homestead all served as reminders that the past is never truly past, and that the consequences of our choices can echo long after we are gone. In the end, the tale of the Walker sisters and their hollow was less a story of evil than of frailty. It was a chronicle of ordinary people, pressed by extraordinary circumstances, making choices that would haunt them and their descendants. The line between victim and perpetrator, between innocence and guilt, blurred until it was all but invisible. The land, impartial and enduring, bore silent witness to it all. As the years slipped by, the story faded from public memory, replaced by new scandals and new fears. Yet, in the quiet moments when the wind rustled through the trees, or a shadow flickered at the edge of vision, the old unease returned. The people of the region learned to live with the knowledge that some wounds never heal, and that some secrets are best left undisturbed. And so, the question remains, what is the true nature of a curse? Is it a force imposed from without, a supernatural blight that lingers in the blood and soil? Or is it something we create ourselves, born of fear, silence, and the desperate need to protect what we love? The evidence, scattered and incomplete, offers no easy answers. The dolls, the graves, the vanished sisters, all are pieces of a puzzle that may never be solved. Perhaps that is the final lesson of Wye Hollow, that the search for truth is itself a kind of haunting, a journey into darkness from which we may not return unchanged. The land remembers, even when we try to forget. And in the end, it is not the ghosts of the past that we should fear, but the shadows we cast in our own hearts. If you ever find yourself wandering the back roads of eastern Tennessee and the mist begins to gather in the hollows, listen closely. You may hear the echo of footsteps or the faintest whisper of a song carried on the wind. And if you come upon a small wooden doll, half buried in the roots of an ancient tree, ask yourself, what stories remain untold? What secrets still linger in the silence? Some mysteries, it seems, are meant to endure long after the last witness has vanished and the world has moved on. But perhaps, in the end, the most haunting legacy of Wye Hollow is not the tragedy itself, but the questions it leaves behind. What would you have done, faced with the same desperation, the same isolation, the same impossible choices? Would you have spoken out, Or would you have kept the silence, hoping to protect those you loved? The answers are never simple. And perhaps that is why the story endures. For in every community, in every family, there are secrets buried just beneath the surface, truths too painful to confront, too dangerous to reveal. The story of the Walker sisters is a mirror, reflecting not only the darkness of one hollow in Tennessee, but the shadows that linger in every human heart. It is a reminder that history is not merely a record of what happened, but a living force, shaping the present and haunting the future. So, as you leave this story behind, carry its lessons with you. Remember that silence can be as deadly as any curse, and that the past is never truly gone. And if, one day, you find yourself standing at the edge of a forgotten hollow, with the wind whispering through the trees and the shadows gathering at your feet, ask yourself, what would you do? If the truth called out to you from the darkness, would you listen or would you turn away and let the silence endure? In the end, perhaps the only true curse is forgetting, and perhaps by remembering, by telling the story, we keep the darkness at bay, if only for a little while longer.